Hello, everyone. Hi, Phil. How are you? I am Dr. Heidi Gardner. I'm a distinguished fellow at Harvard Law School, and I'm a co-author of the new book called Smarter Collaboration. And I think we start out with the worst advice I ever got. Well, it was actually, where do I start? The one I'm zeroing in on happened in the Harvard executive classroom. I was in the middle of an interactive discussion with a whole group, and I was trying out lots of new ideas from what then became my first book, Smart Collaboration. And an individual in the middle of class, in front of about 100 other executives, raises his hand and he said, "You seem to be the kind of person who likes to surf on the edge of her knowledge. If I were you, I'd stay in your lane." Ouch, right? That did
What the hell?
like a constructive piece of advice to me. And I got to be honest, I love surfing on the edge of my knowledge. It's the last thing I'm going to stop. I mean, people who don't do that are either by definition overly cautious or not intellectually curious or, a bunch of things that I wouldn't want to be. So, Phil, that falls into my not helpful category.
Holy crap. Well, so did you punch the person in the face, Heidi, or what did you
I
do?
did not. I'm not 100% sure, right? Because it's at that moment when you're essentially on stage, right? You're in this, formal classroom with wood paneling and, 100 people arrayed in a, gladiator type stadium around you. And you've got a couple of tracks going on in your mind. One is, did he just say what I think he just said? The other one is, why would have he said what I think he just said? And the third one is something like, how long have I been standing here thinking about this? Right? I'm like in front of all these people. But I think my response was something like, really interesting perspective. Anyone else? Just clearly like turn your back on the guy and walk to the other edge of the classroom and keep going. And there were some people there fairly slack jawed as well, just like, what was that? Um,
Yeah.
and, it's always interesting who approaches a professor after class and why. I was absolutely mobbed that day by a number of people who actually apologized on behalf of their country. He was a guy with a very strong accent that belied his origins, and some of his fellow citizens came and apologized on behalf of their country that somebody would have said something like that. So, I think it's important though, as I reflected on it, what he said was not constructive, and especially in the moment and the way he delivered it. But what was helpful for me as I reflected on it is that what I'm talking about when it comes to smarter collaboration makes some people deeply uncomfortable. And what I have to get better at is accepting other people's discomfort and finding ways that we engage together to co-create the kinds of solutions that work for them. Because, I'm a huge risk seeker. We've developed in our work at Gardner and Co, we've developed this psychometric tool that measures people on 7 different dimensions related to collaboration. And one of them is your propensity to take risks. And I am extreme on the risk seeker side. My real motivation is not to miss any opportunity. And okay, maybe that means along the way I, fail, maybe spectacularly, but hey, I haven't missed any good chances. And that individual must have been a pretty extreme risk seeker. Somebody who, risk spotter, somebody who is really motivated to avoid failure, somebody who sees problems around every corner. And I need to be able to connect with those people as well. And so, maybe what I can learn from all of this, yeah, I'm a little bit sugarcoating it because I was unhappy in the moment at his delivery. But what I can learn from that is there are going to be a real range of reactions to the research and the suggestions that I present. And how do I do it in a way that is accessible for lots of different kinds of people? And that's my big takeaway.
Wow. That's a refreshing way to look at an asshole coming at you during a speech in ways that I don't know that I have I don't know that I have the empathy, if you will, to have that. I mean, that, but was this like years ago? Obviously, this wasn't like yesterday, right? I mean,
It
you
was
have the
not,
benefit of
it
some
was,
perspective, right?
I had probably been teaching at Harvard Business School for 4 or 5 years at that point. So
Okay.
this was, this was some time ago. And so, yes, I have the benefit of, a lot of time in between. So it's not raw. But even at the time, and let me tell you, Phil, I mean, I wish I could say that was an isolated incident. But the number of times people in the midst of whether it's a presentation or a keynote speech or teaching at the executive level have said things that would be hard to interpret as constructive. Really, coming at me and really wanting to show that they're smarter. It makes me realize that there are just this range of reactions to what I'm saying. And part of it is a reaction against me, and part of it's a reaction to my ideas. Because my ideas suggest that people who do what he was saying, stay in their lane, people who operate in silos, people who try to be individual heroes and refuse to admit that they need people around them, my research suggests that they're going to turn into dinosaurs. And even though I wouldn't say that in that way, because I can see how that would be off-putting, people, these are really smart people that I'm working with, very senior executives and so forth. And the idea that what got them here isn't going to be continuously sustainable for their long-term success is deeply threatening.
Yeah. And well, and I would say that's deeply refreshing to just remind us that those knuckleheads are not going to be around forever. And it's not just going to be a meteor that crushes them. There's going to be a lot of things that get in their way, and they're going to, their punishment is having to be themselves. So good for you for moving past them. I'm sorry on behalf of men everywhere that guys can be jerks, because I'm sure that is often the case. So I'm, wow, that sucks. So let's talk about better stuff, right? Let's talk about your smart collaboration, because that is tough. And hopefully today we'll have some smart collaboration because we're from different backgrounds and from different places, right? So I love that you define smart collaboration as effective cross-functional collaboration, which I think is super important. But let's break that down, right? So what does effective mean in the terms of your work, please, Heidi?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about effectiveness, we want to make sure that individuals who are coming together and spending their precious time, energy, and effort resolving a problem or creating a solution are so much better than they could have been individually. And better might mean different things depending on what your objectives are. Maybe it's an innovation. Let's develop something really cutting edge and breakthrough that the market hasn't seen before. Okay, that's going to require a particular combination of certain types and different backgrounds, et cetera. Okay, maybe that's one thing. It could be the exact opposite. Maybe it's like, wow, we are in a real crunch period right now. Let's make sure we are operating as efficiently as we can. Let's strip everything back to its essentials. How do we do that and still continue operating? Or, maybe it is something different altogether. I mean, we worked with healthcare organizations who care about patient outcomes. And so what we know is that when people who have different, well, let's move to the functional piece. We talk about cross-functional, yes, but we're almost using that as shorthand for cross, you name it. Right. So, whereas our first book, Smart Collaboration, was really focused on getting different kinds of experts, cross functional, right? So, it could be people from the risk function, from the IT group, from supply chain, really thinking about that complex problem across functions. But now, what we've realized in the intervening, 5 years since it was published, is that it's way more than people who know different things or people who are trained differently, people from different occupational backgrounds. We also need people from different generations because we've got now, for the first time ever, we've got 5 generations in the workforce. And I guarantee that the way somebody who is a sexagenarian looks at a problem is pretty different than the way a millennial does. And neither one of them is right or wrong, but they're looking at it from really different points of view, and they're going to see different risks and opportunities. And so we know that people coming together across differences, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultures, etc., they're going to be able to do things better in that better sense than a homogenous group could, provided that they are led and managed properly.
I think that's so fascinating how you kind of you backed into a key point, I think, and that is the led and managed properly, because often we're led and managed the same, and it's not proper because right what a millennial needs is not what a Gen Z needs, is not what not what an Xer needs, is not what a boomer needs, is not what a anything needs. So let's dive a little more on that. Is that about the way that we lead individually, or what does that really mean as far as leadership goes?
I mean, gosh, there's so many facets to this, and leadership is one of the key themes that runs throughout the book. And we also have an entire chapter devoted to how to lead this kind of smarter collaboration. One thing I will say, though, is, think about working with somebody who approaches problems from a really different point of view than you. Maybe they have a really different value set. They're all about the environment, and you're all about profitability and shareholder returns.
Mm.
You two are likely to step on each other's toes, intellectually speaking, quite often. And you need to have leadership in the sense of great conflict resolution skills, so that when you are really in there, like, punching the ideas, and you say something, and I come at you and I challenge you, but, you have to believe that we are genuinely trying to create something better together. And that the reason I keep hammering you on these ideas is so that we're pressure testing the ideas and making it more innovative. We are harnessing a different set of perspectives that collectively will be a better outcome than if we were really only looking at it through your narrow financial lens. If you believe that, then you might, it might be hard sometimes, especially if you're, sleep deprived or grumpy or under time pressure. But, you might, you ultimately will believe that my challenge to your ideas is just that. It's a challenge to the ideas, not a challenge to you as a human. Or I'm not, in the case like this other guy, like, not trying to make you look stupid in front of a third party, or not undermining your authority, but it's genuinely task conflict. And that requires real leadership of our relationship, leadership of the context, so that we've been able to understand what our shared objective is. um, Leadership of the context in the sense that you and I aren't competing for rewards or resources, because that's not going to put us on the same team. So there's a host of different leadership angles associated with this, and that's only scratching the surface.
Wow. Th- That's yeah, that's so interesting. Conflict resolution skills is the thing that I wrote down there, right? Assuming the best of everyone and being able to resolve conflict by attacking the idea, not the person,
Yeah.
is but that's very different. I mean, I remember, gosh, it's been probably 15 years now. I read Crucial Conversations at the time, super groundbreaking, and yet so many organizations still aren't embracing that. They're still like, no, conflict is bad. Let's not disagree. And it's like, how do we get better if we're not going to sharpen each other? How do we collaborate if we don't disagree, right?
Absolutely. I mean, any organization, company, nonprofit, hospital, you name it, is going to be better off if people inside, disagree with one another before the product or the whatever is unleashed more widely. But what separates, and there's loads of great research in my field, which is organizational behavior, there's loads of research that helps us to understand what allows two people or a group of people to engage in task conflict, real dissent about the ideas, debate, challenge, all of that, and still kind of walk out of that room and say, hey, you want to go grab a coffee? Or, hey, by the way, how was your kid's birthday party? Right? And that's what you want to have, is task conflict that stays zeroed in on the ideas and doesn't bleed into relationship conflict. And the only thing that puts up a big border wall in between them and prevents that leakage is trust. And so trust, if I really believe your good intentions and I trust your competence, right? I have to believe that you have essentially the right to challenge me because you're good at what you do. If I think you're a bozo and you're challenging my ideas, I'm not going to be really well pleased with that. So I have to trust your competence. You're coming from a position where legitimately challenging me. And I have to believe more than that, your character. Your high integrity and you're doing this for the right reasons. And both of those kinds of trust are essential. Um, Individually, they are necessary but not sufficient for true collaboration to take place.
Interesting. That's so interesting. So with that, right, the relationship being a central piece of that, I wrote something down that you said in the book, and you said in some cases the jelly donuts make the difference. And I
Yes.
thought that was super interesting because I read that, right? And I see this on teamwork, right? We talk about how, it's not enough just to give them pizza. But when we talk about cross-functional there, jelly donuts making the difference, right? Delivering something surprising and delightful to another team can often be the difference between like and don't like, trust and don't trust. Is that right? Is that what your research is showing?
So the jelly donuts, it's funny you picked up on that, because it was in a pretty dry part of the book, if I do say so myself. I mean, we were recounting some data analytics that we had done in a retail bank. And I think this is even in the first chapter. Why we started on a dry note is beyond me. But I guess, we were looking at the business case for smarter collaboration. And what we were trying to establish is this is not a soft skill, right? This is not the kind of thing you get around to when your real work is done. This is how you accomplish the real work. This is how smarter collaboration is the only way you're going to get breakthrough results, whether that's innovation or profitability or you name it. And so, chapter one is the business case, and it outlines all of the millions of data records, the analytics, the science, the math behind why smarter collaboration is so beneficial. And this particular example, we were looking at how much better the outcomes were in a huge global bank when people at the branch level collaborated. And we were looking at, getting the mortgage specialists and the debt specialists and the account specialists and blah, 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 to engage with one another, to help individual customers of that bank get the most out of their services. There were lots of different kinds of offerings that would make it more attractive if they consolidated their products under a single bank. But it was also a better user experience in terms of everything from data security to logins, et cetera. And so when you had these different kinds of individuals in the bank putting their heads together and saying, well, from my point of view, this consumer or this type of consumer is going to be better off in these ways, and thinking about what that looked like really from the customer mindset, it created huge value. It created huge value for the customers. And because they were more loyal and put more business with the bank ended up at the branch level better off. And we could contrast branches where that was happening, that kind of collaboration at branch level versus where it wasn't, and then correlate it with the outcomes. And the jelly donuts are an example of what, one of these mortgage specialists would do is, occasionally pop in literally with treats to say, hey, we're all working really hard, but let's just take a break, get to know each other a little bit better over a 15-minute coffee break, grab a donut together, and let's build some of that interpersonal trust. I doubt they use such wonky words, but that's what they meant, is let's get to know each other. And once we do that, we have a better foundation for how we can engage in some of the tough work of building out our business together.
Well, I can tell you anecdotally, I've absolutely seen that work in an organization that I was part of. We would deliver ice cream, like we had ice cream socials. We started out by delivering into the IT department, and then we did enter our kind of larger department, and then we did enter all departments across the building because we had 14 stores, and it completely made a difference just the way people responded in project meetings because they were like, "Oh yeah, I remember you. You brought me sprinkles last week," and it's like we had extra ice cream, so we gave it away. Like it wasn't like we made this big expense, and it's so interesting because the trust level went through the roof because they didn't see us just as technologists, but they saw us as people who also enjoy ice cream. which means we have something in common. Right now, we have a bond. We have something we can build on, as opposed to just random stuff like I have no clue what you do and you have no clue what I do, and therefore your feedback is meaningless, and so is mine to you, right? So that's so interesting. You found that.
Yeah, and Phil, I guess, a lot of people are sitting there scratching their heads right now saying, hang on, I don't ever work face to face with colleagues. What's the virtual equivalent of a jelly donut? And I think that that's a really interesting challenge for us. I would say that, we can figure out what fires up the brain in sort of the ways that spark creativity, that foster that sense of interpersonal connection and humanity, right? Because that's part of what triggers in your brain when you're when you're having a jelly donut together. And so we can think about a whole range of different techniques that people use. One that I use with my core team at Gardner and Co. Is something I learned, and am very happy to acknowledge the source. Dr. Richard Hackman was the head of the social psych department at Harvard University for years. He passed away exactly a decade ago, way too early. But Dr. Hackman was known as the godfather of groups and teams research. Like he, and had just some of the best research. Still, a decade on, is widely considered just the guru in this area. And when we would start one of our fortnightly research symposia, we would always start with good news and just do a whip around the table in the time. And we've now moved to online sessions and go around the Zoom room, and everyone just, real quick, what's one good thing that's happened since the last time we all met? It could be personal or professional or vicarious, maybe it's something that happened to somebody close to you. But there's real science behind that too. It feels like some touchy-feely, hippie stuff. But the science behind it is that when we spark the kind of serotonin and dopamine, that, the good news, we're happy for other people. We're thinking about things that are good for us, but we're also jointly relishing in good stuff that's happened to those whom we're close to. It really does release chemicals in the brain that then go on to aid us in things like creativity and problem solving, or even attention. And so starting meetings with a tactic like that can be a really powerful way that substitutes for jelly donuts in a hybrid environment.
I love that. We try to start our trainings off with, with an icebreaker that tells about like something you're proud of, your favorite, if you have something like I've got a challenge coin here from the military that is
Yeah.
often, something that I'm proud of, and other people share other things, and totally breaks down some barriers. First time for folks, and when they're onboarding, feels uncomfortable, but after that, they kind of get used to it. And now it's like, oh, cool. Like I learned that, or I learned this, makes it much, much simpler to do. And then, yeah, then the learning goes up, the collaboration goes up, the good feelings come up. And then, and then the daily kind of Slack gifts and cheering feels a lot more real, because it is more real. Like it's coming from a person now instead
Yeah.
of your trainer, right? And I think it's so interesting that virtually it's almost like a virtual high five in the hallway that
Yeah,
we
yeah,
don't
yeah,
get anymore.
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's back to the idea of these psychometrics. One of the differences between people is kind of and this tool measures people's sort of natural tendencies and preferences. And one big difference amongst people is how much they really like to reveal about themselves. And so on the one end of the scale, we call it close, and those are people who are perfectly happy, talking about themselves and their personal life, even at work, and they're often quite warm and open. People who are distant, they tend to prefer to be more task focused. They keep a pretty bright line between what's personal and professional. You might have worked with a distant person for a decade, and you don't know if they're in a relationship or if they have a pet or whatever. And so, when we're doing these kinds of exercises, I think it's really important to be aware of people's different comfort levels and not force everyone into the idea that in order to participate, you have to reveal a deep, dark secret. Right? Because, because you can do something like good news and it can be like, hey, got this new water bottle and it didn't leak. That's awesome. Right? Or it can be like, oh, my kid, blah, 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 blah. And creating space where people feel safe to engage in ways that are authentic for them is really important. And being aware that these different preferences exist. And when we allow people to not just be themselves, that's so trite, but genuinely take their preferences and use them as a strength, that's fantastic. Because you could have that person who's distant and you might say, oh, well, how are they good for the group? Because you've just said you have to reveal things in order to make connections. Well, you can't do that forever either, right? And so those people who are more task focused are probably going to be really good at sending signals like, okay, we've just spent some time doing this. And by the way, we've got a really jam-packed agenda. Should we crack on with it? Having a balance and allowing people to bring their preferences into the group can, especially, when you embrace those differences, can be so powerful. And that's what we're talking about with this kind of smarter collaboration.
Yeah. Such a powerful reminder there to, to really respect those differences. I really value that. And you kind of, towards the end of the book here, in the chapter about the illusion of inclusion, you go deeper on that, right? You talk about psychological safety, which I think is so important and something that, I've read recently quite a bit about. So let's talk about that as we're kind of bringing this to a close here. Let's talk about the illusion of inclusion and the importance of promoting that psychological safety.
So, I think a lot of people understand psych safety at this point, but just, in the idea of being inclusive, let's not make that assumption. Psychological safety is a term that was popularized by one of my Harvard Business School colleagues, Amy Edmondson. And, long story short, Amy had the opportunity to dig into a data set where it strangely, very strangely, looked as if the surgical teams had better outcomes for patients, like their patients lived longer and were less likely to get readmitted to hospital if the team had made a bunch of mistakes during the operation. It was like, hang on, that can't be right. And so fortunately, Amy dug into it and used a whole bunch of different kinds of research methods, not just statistical analysis, to understand this. And by engaging with the humans, what she uncovered is that it isn't teams that make more mistakes that have better patient outcomes, but rather teams where they feel safe to admit them. And then that way they can learn from them and not repeat them. Conversely, teams that appeared to be error-free were simply masking their problems, and then they made those same mistakes and hid the same mistakes again and again. And the difference between a team where an anesthesiologist would be willing to say, hang on, there's something, like, don't go anywhere yet because I think there's an issue here. Or a nurse feels like she doesn't or he doesn't need to make a choice between criticizing the doctor's, suturing or something, versus keeping their job, right? And really being able to raise issues without fear of retribution. And Professor Edmondson, her work really demonstrated that in those teams, the high status individual was on point for making sure that psychological safety existed in the group and that people could ask questions and admit mistakes and have more honest, transparent conversations without fear of retribution. And so when we look at psych safety in the context of smarter collaboration, what we are talking about is making sure that people who are brought onto a collaborative, say, project, we'll use that term for a whole range of different kinds of work, but those people who are brought on board are not fulfilling their potential if they don't have the psychological safety to contribute. And oftentimes what we see is underrepresented groups, and that could mean very different things in different contexts. We tend to study gender because it's more readily codifiable, and companies tend to keep gender data, or at least historically have kept male-female gender data in ways that was easier to study. And what we observed is that oftentimes women who are underrepresented at the senior levels of an organization might be brought into a project, but the environment isn't one with psychological safety, so that they are not actually feeling empowered to contribute or motivated to contribute. And maybe it's because they get interrupted too much, or maybe it's because they're spread so thin. They're in such high demand that they're on so many projects at once that they can't do their homework and make a good contribution, or whole range of issues. But if people are brought onto a team for whatever reason, they have to have the ability and the motivation to contribute. And then the people around them need to value those contributions and actually use them in service of, the outcomes that they're working together collectively toward. And so, the illusion of inclusion, we called it that because we've seen so often the idea that, oh, we've got enough of type whatever on our team. It's like, that's just barely the starting point. Making sure those people are valued for their differences is much, much harder than actually getting them on the team. And if you're not going to value them for their differences or for whatever contributions they make, why bother having them there? That wouldn't be very smart.
No, that's so important that we value their contribution and their differences, that we can actually, embrace that and take that home and see that those different perspectives are so, so valuable.
Yeah.
So, wow. Good stuff. Well, we could talk all day, Heidi. I love the book. Congratulations. Smarter
Thank you.
Collaboration is fantastic. So how do we get started on the path towards smarter collaboration, right? I mean, there's so much we could digest in the book, but how do
Yeah.
we get started if we want to get using this?
So we've devoted 2 whole chapters in the book to how do you get started, because we know that one big mistake. There's lots of myths and misconceptions and mistakes that people make when they're trying to engage in collaboration. It ends up not being smarter collaboration. One of the mistakes is that people start with a pet solution and then go looking for the problem. And so I'm working with an organization right now that did exactly that. Their pet solution was the comp system, the compensation and reward system. And they thought that by changing the reward structure, they could engineer people's behavior and make them more collaborative. It didn't work. Turns out that in this particular company, that wasn't the root cause of the problem. People, for sure, they were right. People weren't operating across silos, but it wasn't a reward structure problem. It was a whole range of other things. And when they spent 2 years rejigging the compensation system and didn't get any traction on people's behaviors, they came to us. And it was like, all right, well, let's start from first principles. Let's figure out what's really standing in the way. And we describe a methodology that anyone can use. So chapter 3 in the book focuses on this diagnostic process. How do you use how do you gather data that allows you to have an informed perspective on what's really going wrong? And how do you use that robust methodology to find pockets where collaboration is happening really well and dissect them and figure out how would you replicate those across different parts of the organization? So we lay out that process for people who are really keen to move further down that line. Harvard Business Review Press is publishing in January a toolkit, a smarter collaboration diagnostic toolkit, and it's full of everything from step-by-step instructions and sample emails you can use to engage people to survey methodology and ways to crunch the data. So there's a real how-to guide. We're holding your hand in helping you get started on figuring out where the problems are. And then once you understand what really stands in the way, we've got a whole range of tools that you can use and ways for you to embed smarter collaboration.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I love the book because it's not just making me smarter, but it gives me action. And I love that. There's so much here. I mean, you said the first chapter is boring. I got to tell you, the business outcomes, for me, that's the fun part. I'm like, ooh, how the heck does this work? That's why that jelly donut one really stuck out to me, because I'm like, I get this, right? So that's super, super good. I put up your website, gardnerandco.co. You can get to know more about Heidi. And Heidi, if people want to connect with you on social, is there a place they should go if they want to learn more from you?
Absolutely. So we're really active on LinkedIn. We publish, thought leadership pieces and all sorts of case studies, et cetera, a couple of times a week.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, get to know Dr. Heidi K. Gardner at gardnerandco.co. Get a copy of Smarter Collaboration. It's full of great stuff. And thank you, Heidi, so much for all this goodness today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.